And to some extent, I would say it didn't have to be Juan. Like, I think it is providentially. I think the Lord had this man in his plan for me to marry, but it not in the sense of the Hollywood soulmate, you're gonna complete me. Like, I finally found the one. Like, there, we got to choose each other.
What's up, fam? Welcome back to Big Picture Podcast, where we discuss faith, testimonies, and perspective while focusing on the big picture. I'm your host, Susan Obi. Happy Wednesday to everyone, and thank you so much for joining in and listening to the podcast today. I have some friends on with me. I'm so excited to talk to Julia and Juan about this topic that I have thought about. I know last year when I was thinking about topics and things I wanted to do, I just came up with this idea of wanting to hear some different perspectives about marriage. And I think that obviously marriage is something that God has created. It's beautiful, it's good. And I think that when I think about that topic from a Christian perspective, I think of a few cliches that I always hear, well, maybe this is not a Christian perspective, but the phrase of when you know, or a marriage is hard work, things like that. So I just kind of wanted to have a real and honest conversation with some friends, people that I trust that have been married for a little bit, and just kind of get into some topics about marriage that maybe aren't always talked about or always shared. So today we'll all be hearing from Julia and Juan just about their experience, their thoughts on marriage from the perspective of millennials. So first off, before we jump into it, hi Julia and Juan, how are y'all doing today?
Hey. We're excited to be here. Thanks for having us.
Of course. So Julia's my friend from way back in grad school. So we met in Columbia, Missouri, and I was a bridesmaid in her wedding, although I was not able to attend, but I was still a bridesmaid. So, but yeah, Julia's one of my close friends. We met in small group Bible study and have just stayed connected ever since. So just really happy to have you in my life, and Juan as well, now that y'all have been married for how long? How long have y'all been married?
3.5 almost.
Yeah, more than 3.5.
I guess.
Yeah, almost 4 years. Yeah, flying by.
Wow, it seems like longer, does it?
In some
ways it does feel longer. In other ways it feels just about right.
Okay, all right. So, can y'all tell the people a little bit about who you are? Who are y'all? Who are Julia and Juan?
Yeah, absolutely. Well,
ladies first.
I can start. Yeah. Well, first of all, thank you. We're excited to be here. A little background on me. So I grew up in Missouri, was born in St. Louis as the youngest of 4 daughters. So grew up in a household of women and my dad, 5 women plus my dad. Moved to Columbia, Missouri for college, which is where I eventually met you. So I lived there for college and for work after graduating. And yeah, I think a little bit of my background with faith, I think I, on some level, always believed like that God existed, that even that Jesus was God's son. Like I had that maybe brain knowledge on some level, having been raised, in Christian teaching. But I think as I grew older in high school and college, maybe subconsciously was questioning the goodness of God and like if I was even interested in Christianity. And so fast forward to my mid-20s, really got all the way through college without thinking a whole lot about Christianity. But in my mid-20s, the Lord really started pursuing me in some big ways. So I had 2 women very intentionally disciple me. They walked me through a study on the book of James. And I remember a verse really sticking out to me in the book of James that says, every good and perfect gift is from the Father of the heavenly lights, who doesn't change like shifting shadows. Learning that verse made me kind of reflect on the things I was choosing. So sins I was living in repeatedly, and just kind of recognizing for the first time that as I was choosing these things, that meant I was choosing things that weren't of God and therefore couldn't be good. And so, yeah, with those ladies' pursuit of me, I eventually got to a point of just total surrender. It was kind of like a light switch in some ways, as far as turning from some major sins in big ways that only the Holy Spirit could have done. And yeah, just surrendering to the reality that I was so sinful, so utterly in need of rescue, and that what I needed was the cross, was Christ's blood to yes, be my substitute, to make me right with the Lord. I'm so grateful for his pursuit of me. And then yeah, at that point, that was like shortly after that is when I met you, Susan, in Bible study. So our like small group at that church was one of the first women's groups that I was ever a part of, kind of the beginning of my taste of what church life is, what community in the life of the church looks like. Yeah, encouraging one another, pointing each other to the word, just good friendship. And then not long after that, Juan and I connected on a dating app. And we had some mutual friends.
True millennials.
Yes, there's the millennial. We started dating in the very beginning of 2020. And by 2021, we were engaged, married. Juan graduated seminary. We moved to Birmingham, Alabama, for him to start vocational ministry. So that was a big year, 2021. And then, yeah, a few years later, this past summer, we moved to Aiken, South Carolina, for a new call to a different church. And so we've been here for several months now. And our biggest life event that's happening right now is we are expecting our first child in September.
Amazing. So Juan, you're a pastor.
Yes, currently serving as a pastor. And our stories, though different, still similar in that what happened to us is that we were both lost and now we're found, blind and now we see. How we got there might have looked different, but that's what happened to us in coming to Christ. I grew up in Colombia. Born in Venezuela, grew up in Colombia, and my family moved to New Jersey when I was about 5 years old. I moved to New Jersey when I was about 11, turning 12. And so it's been a long time since I've been in Colombia. So New Jersey kind of feels like more like home to me. When I think about going back home, I think of New Jersey. That's where my family still is. And yeah, I grew up in a Christian home that maybe like mom, strong believer, and my dad, more nominal Christian, maybe went to church once a month or so. But my mom, strong believer, and so she was the first to share the gospel with me. And yeah, I don't remember a time being outside of the church or outside of a relationship with Christ. So I that's sort of the context that I grew up in. Was for a long time as my family, like as I grew up in whether seventh grade, sixth, seventh, eighth grade, there was a season where my mom loved Christ but had issues with the church. Mm. My dad didn't really attend church, and my brother had drifted away from his faith. But in God's grace, the Lord kept me. I had really good and faithful youth leaders at the church that I attended that pursued me and kept me involved in the life of the church. And yeah, so don't know myself outside of the church from a very early age. Grew up in, like I said, I grew up in New Jersey and went to school to be a respiratory therapist. So that's what I did for about a decade as my vocation. But all through that, felt a lot of internal desires to be involved in ministry. And so I did in different ways, participated in church events. I volunteered. I did an internship at a church, then became a deacon, got ordained as a deacon. And eventually, as I continued to get involved, I had great pastors and leaders and mentors that really began to ask the questions about vocational ministry. If I've had seriously thought and prayed about pastoral ministry, and so that kind of began a conversation that probably lasted like 3 years of just me wrestling with an external call to ministry with an internal sense and desire to be in vocational ministry. But I left New Jersey in 2017 and attended Covenant Seminary in St. Louis and was there for 4 years. That's when I met Julia, my last year at Covenant Seminary. Graduated in 21 and walked away from the medical field. Was the last time I worked in respiratory care was in March. No,
It would have been like, June
I guess,
2021.
of 2021. Been working as a full-time pastor. Started off vocational ministry in Birmingham, and now we're in Aiken, South Carolina.
What do you mean when you say vocational ministry?
So, great question. So, my vocation, I'm thinking more of this is what I do with, feels weird calling it career, but this is my calling is to serve the church. And I do that as a full-time job, though I don't necessarily think about it as, job as what I used to do in respiratory care. That was a career, that was a job. This is more of a calling, but this is what I do for a living.
Okay, that makes sense. Makes a lot of sense. So just with hearing y'all's background story, y'all pretty much grew up knowing who God is and Christianity and church and things like that. And we're about to jump in and talk about marriage. So what would y'all say if someone is listening to this and they're like, well, these people are just going to talk about marriage from a Christian perspective, so it's not really like a realistic perspective that other people can relate to. How would y'all kind of like respond to that?
Yeah, I mean, though we would say marriage belongs to the church in the sense that God instituted marriage, but marriage is not just a benefit or a gift that it's just simply for the church. I think our societies benefit from marriage. That is the building block of societies, relationships, right? It begins with marriage, and that's how we procreate and grow as a society. And so, though we're coming at it from a very Christian perspective, Christian worldview, it impacts not just Christians, but those who wouldn't profess to be Christians. Marriage, the institution of marriage is religion, denominations, though we would say it's something that was instituted by God.
Okay, I'll probably come back to that. That's something that is, I see marriage from a biblical perspective. Just thinking back on creation with Adam and Eve coming together, like that was where I first see the idea of marriage. So that's kind of how I think about it. But I know not everyone would have that perspective. So just wanted to kind of give that question to maybe people who are listening, like, okay, this is going to be godly. It's going to be all about God, and kind of invite everyone into this conversation because I think it's beneficial to anyone and everyone who's interested in this topic. So the title of this episode and this series is The Truth About Marriage. So just with that general question, if I asked y'all to answer that question of what is the truth about marriage, how would you answer that? Of course, everyone would have different perspectives, but how would the two of you answer that question? What is the truth about marriage?
Yeah, so I think just the way the question is framed, two things come to mind for me. The truth, just having the article there kind of feels like what is the core or the fundamental nature of truth realities about marriage. And I would say, based on our convictions, is that the essence of marriage is the gospel. Paul writes to the Ephesian church in chapter 5 as he's talking about marriage and loving one another and walking in love and sacrificially living for one another. He ties the idea of marriage to the mystery of the gospel that is now revealed in Christ. And so the fundamental reality, I would say, about marriage is Christ in the church, right? It's how in marriage we have a picture of this greater reality of how Christ loved and gave himself up for the church. And so that for me would be the fundamental, the truth, the core reality of marriage.
Yeah, that's good. I was not expecting you to answer the question like that, but I do like that. I think so. Basically, like before we even get more into the conversation, we're saying that the idea of marriage is from God in heaven. It's instituted and created by God, and it's a picture of the gospel, which, what would you say, how would you just briefly summarize the gospel? That is a Christian church word, but what does that mean, that marriage is a picture of the gospel?
Yeah, so the way that Paul talks about it in Ephesians and in the New Testament, the gospel is the good news that Jesus came into the world to live a perfect life and to take the place of sinners, so that his perfect righteousness is now counted for us, and the punishment that we deserve now falls on Christ. And so, in specifically as we think about marriage, the mystery that marriage points to is this reality of how Christ loved the church, and therefore he gave his life for her in order to redeem her, in order to adorn her with his righteousness. And so, the at the heart of what marriage is just this Christ-like, self-sacrificial nature, or a bent of what marriage is giving yourself up for another.
It may be worth saying marriage was created before the fall. So kind of just to acknowledge that we know marriages don't look like that, right? Like Christ giving himself up for the church is the perfect picture, but our earthly marriages can give evidence to that. They do show that love, but they can also show sin. So it's not a it's a little glimpse into the perfect love that Christ has for the church. But we are waiting for our we are waiting to be perfected.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. Just a picture of how Christ gave his life for the church and continues to love us as people who are flawed, people who are not holy and perfect the way that God is, that Christ still continues to pursue our hearts. He continues to love us. He continues to discipline us. He is committed to us. Marriage is kind of that picture of being committed to one another as husband and wife and having that perfect love for one another. But of course, we can't do that perfectly, but there's still grace that God gives us, and he continues to help us do that with one another, and then definitely in a marriage relationship. So what would y'all say is a perspective about marriage then that you feel that is falsely advertised or falsely believed about marriage?
Yeah, I think we think about it as maybe having disproportionate emphases. So, I think generally society has some idea of what marriage is, right? But a lot of times the emphasis goes too heavy on the hardships or too heavy on the joys, maybe is a generous way of saying it, but even like idealism or romanticism. So I think, yeah, like before we got married, I think a lot of people wanted to warn us, it's going to be a lot of work. It's going to be challenging. This is going to be the hardest thing you've done. We got a lot of that warning. So there was an emphasis, maybe a disproportionate emphasis on how hard it was going to be. But our whole first year of marriage, we kept telling people, like, I don't think people told us how sweet it was going to be. Like, this is so fun. We love spending time together. Like, it introduces a good intimacy that, like, you would never have in any other context. And, like, we're goofballs together. Like, I see a silly side of Juan that, like, nobody else in the world gets to see. So I think on that side, there can be an overemphasis on how hard it is. Not to say that it isn't hard. It is. Those are not mutually exclusive. But then on the flip side, you think about TV shows, movies, books, video games, conversations, the ways we play as children, like so many things that revolve around finding our perfect match or our soulmate or our Prince Charming and finding our happiness and our contentment in that person. Well, I'll be the first to tell you, this guy disappoints me. And that is true of anyone who's ever been married. So I think that's maybe, I would say definitely falsely advertised is the idea that you're going to find your purpose, you're going to find your happiness in this context. Now, you can find happiness, you can find purpose, but not ultimately. And I guess to that point, one, every marriage goes through suffering, probably daily, in lesser or bigger amounts in different seasons, but we're sinners, so we experience suffering every day. That's true in marriage. And on the flip side, contentment is found in Christ, and that can happen outside of marriage. You don't have to be married to find contentment. So, yeah, those are my thoughts.
Yeah, I think I think that's rung true for us in our first year, maybe I would say even our first 2 years of marriage. It was a really sweet experience to be together, to explore we had moved to Birmingham, so exploring a new city together, finding new rhythms. And so I think as people rightly want to bring a sense of seriousness or weightiness into the realities of marriage, sometimes in doing so they can underemphasize the reality of the beauty of it. And I think that run true for us. I think the first 2 years were really sweet. And to your point, as you were talking about how it, like, you're never going to find the person, that one person that's going to bring ultimate fulfillment in your life. And the reason for that is that we're finite beings, right? And not to get super morbid here, right? But we all have a birthday. We also have, in a sense, an expiration date, right? We're not going to live on forever. And so in my limited finitude, it's impossible for me to be all things to Julia, right? I am a flawed individual, and I'm going to disappoint her in multiple different ways, several times a day at times. And so she can't, uh, my life, who I am, just cannot bear the weight of Julia's heart, of Julia's soul, right? Because I'm a finite being, and so I can't bring to her ultimate meaning, ultimate fulfillment, ultimate satisfaction.
Yeah. I think in saying that, I'm wondering if that is the truth, which this is kind of going back a little bit before y'all were married. So if that is the truth of just knowing that whoever anyone ends up marrying, that person's not going to bring them ultimate fulfillment and satisfaction, how would you say then to, I think, go about, I guess, for y'all with choosing one another, even in knowing that, okay, this person's not going to bring me ultimate satisfaction. But what is that, I guess, caveat or is saying, but this person is the person that I choose, if that makes sense.
Yeah, I think a lot of life is growing, and as a believer, specifically growing to be more like Christ. And so, what most attracted me to Juan was knowing that he would help make me more like Christ, both in the ways that he models Christ, love, kindness, patience, and in the ways that we interact together. Marriage is like a mirror. So, kind of because of him and in spite of him, I am being molded to be more like Christ. And to some extent, I would say it didn't have to be Juan. Like, I think it is providentially. I think the Lord had this man in his plan for me to marry, but it not in the sense of the Hollywood soulmate, you're gonna complete me. Like, I finally found the one. Like, we got to choose each other. Yeah, I don't know if that answers the question.
Yeah. But trying to think of good analogies here with the idea that, like, Juliet's not going to complete me. That doesn't deny the fact that she brings, it mediates, and it's a source of happiness in my life, an incredible source of happiness, right? And so think about maybe a relative who might be far from family members, right? So I grew up in Colombia. My mom and my dad were here in New Jersey before we moved, and I would get pictures from my parents, right? And so I cherish those pictures. They were a great source of comfort to know that my parents were thinking of me and that they would send pictures of themselves and things like that. But the pictures themselves were not the reality of my parents, right? And in the same way, Julia and our marriage can be a great source of joy, comfort, happiness, encouragement. But all those things, going back to this idea that like what is the essence, the core fundamental truth of marriage, is that in our marriage and what we experience, those things are meant to point me to someone else, to someone who can actually bear the weight of my soul, and that's Christ, right? And that's what one of the things that John Piper talks about. Why does bread exist? Bread exists in some way for me to know that bread is like Jesus, right? Jesus says, "I am the bread of life," and the picture there is, uh, yeah, bread is good and it feeds my hunger, but there's another person that can give me ultimate fulfillment. And so I would say that that's true also of marriage. And so as I entered into a relationship with Julia and thought about marriage, um, I came with those categories of, yes, she is going to bring joy, comfort, satisfaction, happiness, laughter, but she's not the ultimate source of satisfaction in my life, right?
Y'all answered that really, really well. And just kind of processing what y'all are saying, I think I want to go a little deeper though and ask a follow up question. Because what I'm hearing is that, okay, this person, when y'all chose each other and knew that you were going to enter into a covenant relationship of marriage, it was this um, just peace and knowing that this person does bring me a source of happiness, joy, fulfillment, making me more like Christ. Also, I do know and see that they are imperfect, but that's pointing me to the fact that, yeah, of course, everyone is imperfect except Christ. Christ is the only one that can bring me all these things that I really, 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 truly want and need to have on a regular basis imperfectly: love, forgiveness, joy, mercy, grace, all of those things. So it's just kind of pointing to the bigger picture of that no one can give you those things fully and perfectly except for Jesus. So I guess I would ask the follow up of like, then how would you say to have that balance of, okay, this person is bringing me these things that I like, that I want, that are good for me, I have peace about this, but they also have their imperfections? How do you find that balance of, I guess clearly for y'all it was more of like, yeah, they're bringing me more happiness than sadness, if that makes sense. So how do you find that balance of, they're imperfect but they're not too imperfect to where I'm not going to choose to go into this?